Please note, every episode is someone's individual experience. One data point is not representative of everyone's time in the Air Force. Do your due diligence. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views of the Department of Defense or its components. Welcome back to another episode of the DFM series, a part of the For the Zoomies podcast, and I'm your host, Andrew Cormier. Today's guest is a 2008 Air Force Academy graduate who went on to become an acquisitions officer. He spent some time in the acquiring space systems until he attended UCLA for his MBA and started his entrepreneurial journey. His startup ventures included founding New Era Fitness as well as Body Spec. And if I'm not mistaken, you're starting another one as well.
Yep.
He currently serves in his military capacity as Chief of Technology Assessment, Office of the Undersecretary of the Defense for Research and Engineering at the Pentagon, and as a civilian works as Chief Strategy Officer at Product Plan. Ladies and gentlemen, MAJ Bryce Luken.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. And Andrew, I'm going to push on you to just call me Bryce on this call, and you'll have to flip it back when I see you back on the hill.
Will do. I almost just said sir again. It's hard to break these habits. I guess dual year just kind of worked it into my head, and I can't get it out.
It does. And it'll stay with you. It still gets me when people ask me not to do it. It still happens.
Oh, yeah. So first off, I have to give a little bit of credit and a shout out to not only Chase Lane, but Captain Sapita for really putting me in touch with you. They're both mentors of mine and instructors and colleagues of yours, if I'm correct.
No, Chase and I taught together for 3 years back in the management department. We did some ventures on the side that's not even listed on my LinkedIn or on my background.
Okay.
We did some very lucrative consulting gigs with him, to include a nice trip to Amsterdam for ING Bank. So I had a great time with Chase. We're still really, really close friends. And then Captain Sapita, that I now teach with him in the department, was formerly my student. So, the wrinkles and the age, I'm starting to feel it. I don't think of myself as old, but when your student shows back up to teach with you, you definitely start to feel it.
That's kind of crazy. I remember my English teacher this year was the English teacher of my freshman year English teacher. So I mean, I don't have that personal experience, but I'm sure it's odd to kind of shit. Am I getting old?
Yeah, exactly.
So to get right into it, do you think you could give some background about yourself? What initially brought you to the academy before you started teaching there?
Yeah, no, it goes back actually when I was going from middle school to high school. I grew up in a small town in California, Lompoc. Not Lompoc. I know Vin Diesel says it in the first Fast and the Furious, but he pronounced it wrong. It's Lompoc. It's about 2 hours north of LA, right outside the gates of Vandenberg Air Force Base. That's where I grew up. Not a military brat, but right across the street from me was another family with 2 boys, and the oldest son, who was 8 years older than me. Got into the academy for water polo, and I went to his graduation when I was about to become a freshman in high school. So I came out here to Colorado Springs and saw an academy graduation. I was like, "What is this? This is really cool." So that was really my first exposure to it, and that's what kind of lit me up to wanting to go there, and got just the pageantry, the excitement. No idea what meant to be in the military. None of my parents' generation served. My grandpa's obviously did during World War II, but it kind of stopped in the family lineage. So that's what exposed me and got me excited. And then I was fortunate enough to be recruited for football, and so that brought me back out on visits and got to really kind of see the place a little bit more, and got me excited to come.
Sure. Did you enjoy your academy experience? I'm sure it's a little bit different as a football player.
Yeah, I mean, I think most grads say this, right? Great place to be from, not at. Now, of course, I'm back there as an adjunct teaching as much as I can because I love it on the side. It's different being on the other side of the table when you reflect back on it, you do see all the value, but the pain is hard, right?
Hmm.
But like my dad would always tell me, pain is weakness leaving the body. And so I owe so much in terms of how that place has forged me. And I
Hmm.
think given a really unique kind of approach and view of the world and approach to how we work and treat people in our companies or in our units, that is highly distinguishable compared to other universities and upbringings that folks have through their professional development. That now I'm just, all I can say is I'm forever grateful and indebted to what the academy is honestly done. But I get it. It's hard to see that when you're there.
Hmm.
You're going back to that dorm room every every day, and you're just ready for Friday, a blue Friday, to
Mm.
show up on the calendar to get out the gates. I get it.
Yeah.
But you'll reflect back positively when you make it through.
I'm hoping so. Tonight, we start the Commandant's Challenge, the
Oh,
culminating event, and then it leads into tomorrow. So at least we get a day off from school. That's one way to put a positive spin on it.
absolutely. And a lot of grads disagree with me on this point. I miss Mitch's, to be honest.
All right, let's hear it.
How
Why?
easy and convenient. You show up, you don't have to think, right? Especially if you become an operator and you're trying to be as efficient with your time. There's
Hmm.
nothing more efficient than Mitch's in your life. Now, those that like the nice cuisine, the home cooked meal, whatever it is, I get it. It's not
Hmm.
going to deliver on that front. You can do that on weekends though, right?
Yeah.
During the week when it's time to be able to produce, be efficient and effective, Mitch's gets the job done, and so I miss it all the time. I don't know what I'm doing for dinner tonight. I gotta figure it out, right? I wish I could just walk to Mitch's and grab some food and then get back to work, but that's not the case. So that's my opinion.
Okay, I actually kind of agree. I've heard similar takes from people who never even went here. I just hear them say like, "Oh, it's like $6 to get meals as a
Yeah.
as a captain," and so
Yep.
they're like, "I don't have to clean." It's like
Yep.
I guess decent enough food. They have like
Hmm.
salmon and stuff in the salad line, so I guess
Exactly.
it ain't so bad.
No.
Um, so can you give some insight into your experience with acquisitions right out of the academy?
Yeah. No. No. Absolutely. I was super pumped when I got acquisitions. Was able to get my first base selection, which was Los Angeles Air Force Base. Multitude of reasons why I wanted to be there. One, obviously, from Southern California, so it was exciting to be back near family in kind
Hmm.
of Orange County, San Diego area. But then the second was, I had a mentor. We all do. A captain at the time, Captain Rob Mishev, and he mentioned, getting to one of the big acquisition centers, Hanscom, Wright Patterson, obviously, or LA, lets you get to work on these major weapon systems, these big programs, and get an understanding. Now, there's pros and cons, kind of reflecting back on it. Some of the pros are, big dollars, big, high profile programs. That's great. Not a lot of autonomy, right? When you're dealing with billions, my first contract that I was working on was $4.2 billion buying communication satellites. So I worked in Milsatcom
As a lieutenant?
as a lieutenant. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. And here's the real crazy thing. I showed up first week, and you always meet with your commander. So it was a '06, a colonel for me, and he's sees I came from the Air Force Academy, and he's like, we're short an integrated product team lead, which is an engineering role. And he's like, I know you guys have a lot of engineering out of the Air Force Academy, even though your thing says management, but you
Hmm.
do have a BS, a bachelor's of science. And he's like, can you handle this? And of course, you show up, you say, yes, I can
Hmm.
handle it. Having no idea what you're getting yourself into. So my first job was I was responsible for really the engineering efforts on 50% of the satellite, what's called the bus side of the satellite. So the structure, the propulsion systems, the electronic systems,
Okay.
everything that's like the components of the satellite. My counterpart was responsible for the payload, which in communications was the phased arrays, all the different antennas, and specific units inside of the satellite that dealt specific to communications. And so I got to deal, with triple junction solar arrays. I had to deal with, we were having nickel issues out of Canada for the batteries, and so all this engineering stuff. But it was, you figure it out. The academy doesn't always, maybe you haven't been taught those exact things out of
Hmm.
your undergrad, but you've been taught how to problem solve, and your life, you should have hopefully come out being a lifelong learner, where you're just going to teach yourself what you need to know, right?
Mm.
And so that's what I started doing right out of the gate on a big program. Not a lot of autonomy on the big programs. You can't make a lot of decisions that you think you would be able to make. And as I went through the career there at LA, I learned sometimes even my colonel didn't even have the decision power.
Mm.
I had to go back to the Pentagon to get it, because it was so many dollars, right? And so those thresholds are really high. So, I've heard folks, I think Chase might even be one of them, on a program where it's still an important program. I think he was doing the rescue helicopters at Langley for his first assignment. You get a little bit more autonomy, and even if you go to if you get put at a smaller acquisition site, you could be kind of leading decisions that are material to that contract or to that acquisition. So I didn't have a lot of that
Mm.
when I was there, but it was big dollars, high profile. So I was blessed. I got to be inside Boeing's manufacturing facility, which was really, really cool. It's 1.3 or 1.6 million square foot facility
Holy crap.
that used to build Studebaker cars. So back in the day, there used to be a lot more car manufacturers, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, post World War II. So it used to make cars, and then it's the legacy of that industry, especially out there, had a lot of Howard Hughes ties. So it used to be Hughes Aerospace,
Okay.
and then Boeing acquired it, I think, in the 90s. Um, and they got that plant as part of it. So really got to see the satellite go from what I call Lego pieces, or I'd even drive out or fly out to go meet tier 2, tier 3 suppliers that are making individual components that are then
Hmm.
getting integrated into the bigger satellite, and then see a full bird that was about the size of a school bus once done. Take it to LAX, shove it in the nose of a C5, and fly it down to Cape Canaveral. Spend 2-3 months integrating it onto a booster, either an Atlas or a oh my gosh, Delta rocket. Time, I know SpaceX is in the game. This is for SpaceX. SpaceX was around. I'm not that old. They just weren't putting up Air Force assets yet.
Hmm.
So it was either Delta or an Atlas rocket, and then put it up in space, and then pull out my, what is it, Astro 310 home in transfers, and we'd get that thing from low Earth orbit out to geostationary orbit at 22,500 miles. And then, interestingly enough, on these satellites, the Air Force, fly them from Schriever, but the Army controls the comms. So you
Hmm.
hand over the communication aspect. They're the ones that are deciding, what resources and whatnot are actually using the communications on the satellite. I always thought that was kind of interesting. And so then after that, I was done, and it was on to the next bird. We were shooting one up about every year and a half. So there's 12 satellites on it. Some of the fun stuff was international partnerships. One of the satellites was bought by the Australian Air Force,
Okay.
and buying one satellite gave them 1/12 of the bandwidth of the entire constellation. So a good investment for them, right? Instead of having to build 12 birds for global coverage themselves, they could buy one.
Hmm.
Um, and so got to go to Australia a few times, and sometimes we'd agree to meet halfway in Hawaii for meetings.
For you.
Yeah, it was tough, man. My biggest challenge on that contract was dealing with the Australian money in Wells Fargo Bank that was collecting interest. We didn't know what to do with the interest, because the Aussies didn't want it back, and there was nothing we could do with it. I don't know how they solved that ultimately, but I had a lot of ideas for solutions on what to do with $250 million sitting in a bank account getting interest. Yeah.
Oh my God. That's crazy to hear that you're working like with numbers that big at such a young age. There's a few
Yeah.
threads I want to pull on there.
Yeah.
So bases,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about acquisitions hubs being Hanscom. I'm a mass hole myself, so that might be close to home,
Yeah.
potentially
Yeah.
a choice for me. But you also mentioned LA Air Force Base. And to tie that to what you said about working on big versus small projects,
Hmm.
is it like, I want to decipher, is it a guarantee that if you go one of those big bases that you'll be um, incorporated into a bigger, higher profile job? And on top of that, if you are or not, what are the pros and cons of working with bigger or smaller things? You mentioned a few of them, but
Yeah.
how does that carry over into skills that you can use elsewhere?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say it's not a guarantee, right? Not only a guarantee in size of like program you'd be put on, but there's also not a guarantee on really what I would call quality, right?
Okay.
Um, from a size standpoint, I had friends that were, on weather satellites, which still really matter, super important, but definitely not an area that excited me as much because the satellites I was actually buying were the same ones DirecTV and Sirius XM Radio were buying at the time. So I was getting
Okay.
some commercial exposure there as well. So again, and that's luck of the draw. I didn't pick that program, right? I got
Mhm.
assigned to LA and I have no idea how I got put on wideband global satcom, right? No idea how that happens. So there's a little bit, it's the nature of the beast that we deal with coming out of the academy. And I'm sure ROTC is the same way. You kind of get slotted and put in. Nobody's picking you because nobody knows you,
Mhm.
right? And I had friends that got put on what I call paper programs that were something so futuristic. They weren't getting to work on hardware or fielding anything. They were thinking about 5 years, 10 years down the road. Benefits to that, I'm sure that they could probably speak to. For me, a bias. I only know what I know. I got to work
Mhm.
on production, and that was really really exciting to me. I had
Okay.
friends that landed in like Green Door, like super secret squirrely stuff, and that was really beneficial from what they got to do from a national security perspective and work on. Can't tell a lot of people about it, but in essence, a very high profile, high quality program. Um, so it's not guaranteed size, and it's really not guaranteed quality. So when you're making that decision too, you need to think about, okay, what is the portfolio of that base and what they do, right? Like Hanscom has a lot of electronic systems. So you got aviation packages, you got air traffic control operations,
Okay.
at Hanscom. You think about, right, Pat, you're going to be dealing with fixed wing programs. You also potentially will have some sustainment program offices there. I saw a solicitation the other day for, a program manager for like end of life of an aircraft, and I was like, that sounds horrible to me.
Mhm. Not very fun.
I'm not buying the new thing. I'm just trying to like sustain an off ramp the old thing. So you're gonna get what you get, and just to steal a recent phrase from another colleague, you gotta just bloom where you're planted and do the best you can with what you have and be the best. And so you can only control so much, and so your control mechanism is trying to pick the base, understand what they do. Like if you're going down to Eglin, you could be buying bombs, right? And that down there, they're doing a lot of the weapons procurement. So it,
Okay.
it it just it just depends, right? I think another consideration when you're thinking about bases is also things outside the Air Force piece. Like for me, going to a major metro that had great universities and other things, given my interest, motivated me. Whereas I heard people that like, I want to be at Albuquerque, New Mexico, because I want to go ski at Taos, right, or something, and be outdoorsy and hunt,
Mhm.
the Southern Rockies or whatever it might be. So really, there's personal motivations I think that can influence it as well. But from a
Okay.
professional side, I think understanding those portfolios and seeing what you can have a chance to go get after.
Okay. That makes sense because I actually remember filling out my ops Air Force preferences.
Yeah,
Full disclosure, I so you fill out your job
yeah,
preferences as well as your locations, and I do not want to be a pilot, but I knew all the locations that were cool required like me to put that I wanted to be pilot, so I can kind of relate of
yeah.
figuring out what the base actually has for an offering
Mhm.
and what you actually want to do and
Yep,
making a decision combining those.
yep. Yeah, it
Mhm.
definitely needs to to be holistic. I mean, for Boston and LA, Boston, we all know you got your Harvards, your MITs sitting there. In LA,
Mhm.
you got your UCLA, USC, Loyola Marymount. So, and there's potentially night school options and things like that. So, from an education perspective, that was something on my criteria. So, Boston was my number two. Um, and those I think all can like weigh in really for consideration.
Yeah. So moving on to that higher education component, you did your MBA at UCLA. When you were entering grad school, did you have any intention of having a startup?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, my pitch, you'll learn this when you apply for an MBA program, is like, what makes you unique? Like, why should they pick you outside your test scores and everything? Why should they pick you to be put into the canvas of the students that are going to come in to that university, right? Because they want diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, and diverse aspirations, right?
Hmm.
So they really want to put together unique classes at these schools. And so my angle, and I think I still even remember, like my very cheesy tagline was "Officer by day, entrepreneur by night."
Okay.
And so that was really the theme of a lot of my essays and my narrative, and what I would speak to in interview processes was, I'm an officer, I serve, I love that, I'm going to continue to do that, because I was doing the faculty sponsorship program pipeline. So
Okay.
for my MBA, I was going to be sponsored by the Department of Management to come back and teach, because that was something I really wanted to do. And I told that narrative. And I would pitch to the schools like, what I take from here, I'm going to take back and give to hundreds of cadets at the Air Force Academy that are future
Yeah, that's
officers.
a strong
This is
selling
the
point.
Yeah, like this is the moment in time for you, UCLA or Michigan, or what, all the different schools, Notre Dame. It is the opportunity for your school to put an impression on a military academy when I go back and do that. So you got to find these stories and these threads to kind of pull on. And so the entrepreneur side of me was always a big piece. I wanted to refine that skill set, and I knew the resources and experience of the professors, and that was a big piece. Looking at the Price Center of Entrepreneurship at UCLA was a big selling point, that they could foster and really nourish that aspiration
Mhm.
for me. And so I knew I wanted to do a startup when I went there. Didn't know exactly what it would be, but I knew I wanted to either do one on myself or join a classmate and do one of theirs.
Okay. So what do you think your MBA, well, you were doing your startup while you were getting your MBA, so you can't call it completely like, oh, I used everything from my MBA because it wasn't completed yet. But
Yeah.
from your MBA, what did you find extremely like necessary from using the skills from your MBA, and what did you find useless from your MBA as it pertains to your startup?
Ooh, let me try to figure out useless first. I mean, they're really, I mean, every class, because you get so much more flexibility than you do as a cadet, like picking your classes, right? Like there
Okay.
is a core and in MBA programs, right? Like you have to do macro and micro econ. Yes, you have to do accounting all over again. You need the basics of blocking, of tackling, of business, and even speaking the language. And I don't see how that would be ever have been like a waste of time. Am I going to use microeconomics and have to go back to calculus and take derivatives, in econ? No, like I'm not
Mhm.
going to do that. But do I now understand that world and can think about that pragmatically? Absolutely. So it's really tough for me to think through like complete waste of time. Some of the like leadership and organizational behavior stuff, I was like, USAF did this better. I don't really need this. But nonetheless, again, I think I have that I'm always an optimist, so I'm going to go into the class trying to think that this is going to not be a waste of my time, because
Mhm.
I bad mental mindset walking in if I to think otherwise. What was extremely beneficial once I was starting Body Spec, so that was the business I started there. They had what was called the business creation option. So kind of like a capstone, you had two options. One was either go consult for a company. So UCLA had companies say, hey, we want some MBA consultants. Funny enough, UCLA would get paid for it. And then you get that experience to go out and do consulting, like a very scoped piece of work for a company. And usually great brands, great companies would come to UCLA to do that. So that was an opportunity to really start cutting your teeth, build up a resume, kind of like an internship level kind of resume builder. So I chose not to do that. I went with what's called the business creation option. And there you're getting paired with faculty to actually, no kidding, try to start a company and create a business. And so there I had Jeff Shinerock was my professor, who was a serial entrepreneur himself, adjunct at UCLA. So all his classes that I enrolled in didn't start till 7:30 at night because he had a day job. And so I'd go from 7:30 till 10 p.m. at night in his class. And it was all business building, everything from term sheets from investors to how do you execute this, to he'd bring in investors and we'd have to pitch them on the business. So really got to kind of cut our teeth on it. UCLA had a pitch competition that you could go for as well to win money and get investment. A lot of schools have that, where they'll have seed funds for their MBA students to kind of seed their startup, to give them some of the capital that they would need to get going. And so that was a huge blessing. The brand, I leveraged UCLA's medical school for Body Spec to really bootstrap it, so I didn't have to spend a bunch of money, and use some of the resources and assets from the medical school. So I was able to tap other parts of the university system as well. So yeah, they were extremely helpful.
That was an awesome segue. Do you think you could take us through what you did with Body Spec actually while you were in MBA program?
Body Spec, the origin, of course, good old USAFA. So down at the Human Performance Lab down there in the athletic department, as part of the football team, and then when I was doing just strength and conditioning work with Coach Buck Blackwood down there, I got to use the Human Performance Lab and use a DEXA scanner, a dual energy X-ray absorptimetry machine built by General Electric that would look at your body composition. So it'd understand body fat, muscle mass, and bone density, and really digitize your body. And I loved it. I loved it when I was a cadet. And so when I was at UCLA, I started to research, like, why can't you access these easily in the public sector? Why are people only standing on scales or going to a gym, getting pinched, whatever it might be? And I found, it cost me to do one scan at Cedars-Sinai, $275. And I was like, this feels too much. And so really tried to figure out, is there a compelling business model and value proposition that would allow me to take that scanner that sits in a hospital that's very expensive. Hospitals are expensive. I think let's just run with that assumption, right? Pull it out of that environment and deliver this product and service to customers at a much lower cost. So the thesis of the business was taking this X-ray scanner, putting it into a mobile vehicle so that we could start. The go-to-market was selling it to gyms. And so as a scrappy entrepreneur, first I called GE and found, like, the machine was about $90,000. I said, okay, so, you get into Excel, you do the number crunching. How many things at what price would I have to sell to make this work? But to test all that, I went over to the nursing school at UCLA, and I found a PhD that did research that needed body composition as part of his research. So he had a machine. I said, do you use this on weekends? And he said, no. And I was like, well, what if I bring people in to scan on weekends? How much would I need to pay you? And he's like, I got to pay a lab technician to come in here and do this for you. So like $40 a scan. And he was a really, really cool guy. And I was like, that sounds great. And I said, I'll reserve it for 4 weekends in a month. So a month from now, I want the consecutive 4 weekends. And then I just walked to CrossFit gyms and started knocking on doors and selling owners on. I got the gold standard of body composition testing for your members up at UCLA. So I was using the brand. And so I sold out 4 weekends, just going door to door, selling it to gyms to get people to come up for $75. And so I was trying to prove price point. And so that's really was the beginning of, like, proving it and seeing if it would work. And got that going, and eventually brought in my classmate from USAFA to join, Jason Belville. And he and I at the time, I won't go on it, we were having a side story to see who can start the next business. We would both go after it for whoever could produce revenue first. That was our bet.
Okay.
And then I got a classmate from UCLA to join, who also happened to have some capital to invest, and we got going and bought our first truck and scanner and got going. And now today, that business is in California, Washington, and Texas. Has done over 150,000 customers. Got into corporate health and wellness, so Google, Adobe, Facebook were all corporate clients, doing these body composition scans. And so that's really, it all began there. I was days I didn't have class, or if class was at night, I'd be out scanning people at 5 a.m. when the gym opened to get it started. And so that was the beginning of Body Spec.
I really love hearing stories like that. The other day, I actually I looked up Body Spec, and I was just going through the homepage, and I think they're selling them for $40 now. So
Yeah.
they must have a much
Mhm.
bigger market now if they're going
Yeah. I
to
mean,
lower products.
the whole business model has really changed. The price point came down. They also started a subscription business to it, so people could pay a monthly fee and have unlimited scans, which really got predictable revenue into the business, which was
Hmm.
nice. They're out raising money right now. They're growing like crazy still. And so they're trying to close the next round to potentially look at a franchise model, and roll up with other healthcare services, with that investor. So it'll be interesting to see. It's on what is it, 2023? So it's been about a decade now. It takes 10 years to make an overnight success, unless you're Instagram, I guess. But it's still going along.
So how does that work? Since like you're the founder, but do you still have equity in it, or do they just tell you because they might understand that you might
Mhm.
be interested?
Yeah. So I'm still an equity holder as a
Okay.
result of the fact that I knew I had to come back and teach. I had to put the uniform back on. I couldn't, do this thing full time. The partners kind of took over, and as you're going through that, you keep a good relationship because it's friends, but they're also your business partners. My equity had to like decrease from like what it started to, because I couldn't do it full time. I couldn't see this thing from cradle to grave. And that was just the reality of the choice I made to do the faculty pipeline versus just go after it full time myself. And I don't regret that trade off at all. It was a great learning moment. I mean, for me personally, I also learned that I never want to do B2C, business to consumer services again. It
So
wasn't.
B2B is your kind of.
I like B2B a lot more,
Okay.
business to business, and I prefer productized, mostly digital tech products now. It was expensive to scale that thing. Every time we needed to build more capacity in the business, we had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to build that capacity, and so that took a lot of capital to do it. So there's a
Hmm.
various business reasons why I prefer other business models now. But I learned that by going through that. But I learned how to raise money. I learned how to do debt. And yeah, I mean, there's a multitude of learnings that made me smarter for the next one.
Okay. So he kind of laid out a tangible experience of yours that runs you through kind of how you start up a startup company,
Mhm.
but to bring it to more of the fundamental principles of starting up a company, like what do you consider if you want to do something like this?
Yeah, I mean, when folks say I want to start a business, you can't just always just create something, right?
Hmm.
Like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, start a poker chip manufacturing, whatever it might be, because I love poker, right? Um, you have to find kind of perfect match. I think that's important is passion and problem. So it needs to be something in an area you're passionate about or can become passionate about. And I can tell you the businesses that I've been a part of, I didn't necessarily know I was going to be passionate about food or virtual reality or product management, like some of the different businesses I've done now. Um, but I could become passionate about it and I could be excited. And then you have to really know, is it solving a real problem. Like, you got to solve a problem out there. That's really where the value creation happens and exists. And so that really has to be a focus area. So the problem with like body spec was folks can't access the best gold standard, body composition testing, unless they wanted to pay an extreme price and always have to drive to a hospital to do it. And scheduling was a nightmare. So scheduling was a pain, price was a pain, and the existing solutions were inferior. Is there a willingness of a customer out there to spend money to do your product or service, and that willingness for them to spend, is that enough for this to actually, from an economics perspective, make sense? And so being obsessed over the problem and solving a problem is what I've seen most great entrepreneurs, how they succeed. Of course, every now and then you can get lucky, right? And you do something that you just wanted to build something for a reason. I mean, honestly, Andrew, I would say your podcast, right? Like, your problem is cadets don't know. They don't have insight to the future. They don't know, like, after graduate, what happens? What do I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are the options after I take the uniform off? Or what are the options for me to become a general or a flag officer, right? That's the problem that you're solving with this,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so
trying to, at least.
Yeah, no, from the folks I've seen you've had on, you're doing a great job, man.
Thank you, Bryce.
And so that's really the nexus, right? And I think that's an important thing when you're trying to discover what you want to do. If you're going to try to start something or join something, I've joined teams where it's 2 or 3 entrepreneurs that really had the original idea. I'm trying to figure out, when I talk to them and have them sell me on, is this a big problem that needs to be solved, and is there a business model and business case here to go and solve it? Right.
Can you actually dive into that to figure out how, or figuring out if there is a problem? Like, is it polls, or what sort of metrics do you pull on to prove that this is a problem that people want solved?
Yeah. There's really kind of 2 you can go look at, or not look at, 2 things you can do. One is just kind of doing the good old Google research, right? Of trying to size and understand, like, does this matter, right? So getting market understanding, what spending behaviors and patterns, and understand, is there something big enough there that topically will give you directional sense, right?
Okay.
To find out if it's a real problem, you got to get out of the door and go talk to people. You're not going to find all the answers on Google, right? And you got to talk to actual potential customers and figure out, do people care about this? Do they light up? Do they go like, oh my gosh, that is a problem? Well, how big of a problem is that for you, right? And asking those why questions and like trying to peel back the onion to really see it. And you gotta ask enough people and talk to enough people to see the pattern that, okay, this is a recurring thing. Or I talked to 10 people, 8 of them said it's an absolute, 2 were on the fence, or 2 were like, heck no. Now you can start using that to extrapolate out, how big this problem could be. Try to make sure you don't have selection bias and all those kinds of things when you're doing that. But conversations, sure, there's services out there. You can send the email out and do a survey, but there's nothing better than the conversation. Okay. Because they're going to say certain words or certain things that you can drill into further and further understand the problem set or the industry, understand their business and how this would all work. That's paramount. So the bottom line is you got to talk to people. And so you got to be able to have that conversational ability. You got to be able to communicate your ideas, your hypotheses for what it is you're trying to create, and bounce that off people. And it can't be your friends and family, because they're just going to tell you how awesome you are and how much they love you. And it's all going to be sugar. You need honest, candid, like, feedback, right?
I remember the first time you told me about the body spec startup. The problem wasn't necessarily that this sort of technology didn't exist. It was more of a accessibility thing and maybe price point, because it wasn't that nobody could get a DEXA scan. It's just that it was overpriced. And like you said, there was all these barriers to entry of having to go into a hospital. Scheduling's a nightmare. And so I think that's an avenue of attacking problems of, okay, yeah, there is a solution that exists, but how can we make it more accessible if people want it to be more accessible?
Exactly. And, for especially for your audience, Andrew, cadets, future officers, these problems are all over the place in the military, in the government, in all organizations. You just have to listen. And when you hear something, key in on it and start asking questions to peel back the onion. And then go outside, maybe your unit, your individual organization, and ask others in other units, other organizations, is this something that is also a pain for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then that's when you can find, issues and problems that are spread across a lot of folks. And then you have like a real opportunity to solve something that matters, right? For an organization. But problems are always, they're in front of our face, and we hear about them at happy hours, around the dorms, shooting it at Mitch's, eating, the complaints.
Mm-hmm.
All right, how big of a problem is this? Doesn't matter. Is it worth solving? And then if I solve it, like, what will that impact potentially be? So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
problem solving.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds so basic, but that's what it is.
People will pay if you can
Mhm.
solve their problems.
Yep.
Hey, real quick, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to take a second to tell you about my good friend I grew up playing hockey with. His name's Jake Tebow. During my freshman year parents' weekend, I was notified that Jake got into a severe hockey accident where he was paralyzed from the waist down with little hopes of walking again. Through the help of many generous people and a no-quit attitude, he's been able to make great progress, but he still needs your help. If you want to check out his story and donate, his website is tbo14tough.com. That's TBO, the number 14tough.com. Or check out his Instagram, jake.tebow, to support his progress. Thanks. This means an absolute ton. Now back to the episode. How does leverage play a role in a startup? Because like you said, you didn't have the money to buy these DEXA scan things. You leveraged other people having resources for you to draw on. But how does leverage play a role in a lot of startups?
Yeah, I mean, leverage, and we can define that, in money terms, in time, right? I mean, there was a point at Body Spec where Jason and I personally guaranteed so much debt from a equipment lender to get that business off the ground that if we failed, I know for me, I was going to have to file personal bankruptcy, and I did not want to go have that conversation back with the Air Force that, hey, you got a captain in the Air Force that's like bankrupt. That just doesn't go well. And so, yeah, I created a lot of, I guess you could say, a lot of leverage and a lot of risk. I mean, my most recent foray, I left a high-paying private equity job to do a startup from the ground up, Thrust AI, which we can get into later. I went 5 months without pay. Like that's scary for a lot of folks. And do you have that risk appetite to do that? And then the other is time. You're trying to figure out what levers am I going to pull on time? I'm an officer. Like right now, I'm having to do Air Command and Staff College as a major, so I can promote in the reserves to lieutenant colonel. Okay, I got to do that at night. I got to figure out how do I manage that with family and with trying to run a company, and the finances. And when I quit the PE job, I had pretty good line of sight that I was going to create some revenue and could get a paycheck, but it wasn't guaranteed. And so I had backup plans for another private equity shop that was interested in having me. And so that was the backup. So you create leverage, but you then try to de-risk it in most situations, right? With backup plans and another COAs, like courses of action that you can maneuver through. You have to just be uncomfortable with unknowns, though. And you just try to reduce the amount of unknowns and create as much optionality as you possibly can, so you don't find yourself in such a levered position that, oh my gosh, we didn't win the contract. I can't have a paycheck, but I do have a mortgage to pay. Right? And so you can de-risk that through your savings. You can de-risk that. I have a wonderful spouse that kept the income coming as well, so we weren't fully leveraged over that period of time. So there's all those little trade-offs that you have to think about. But uh, entrepreneurs are not gamblers; they're risk managers, right? And you just got to manage the risk and create as much optionality as you can across your decision sets to give you the best chance to go for victory on the big bet. But I got the backups, right? If this goes south, right? So body spec was probably the worst situation I ever put myself in, from a full like financial leverage, right?
How
Now,
so?
well, because we took debt. I did not have the money to buy the thing, um, and we didn't want to raise venture. Like another way to de-risk it as an entrepreneur is get OPM, other people's money, venture capitalists,
Mhm.
friends, families, and fools, as they like to say, to put money into your bank account that you can run and live and eat ramen off of for a period of time while you get the thing going, right? And so we knew we didn't have a big family friends network yet. We were trying to move fast. We got somebody to agree to underwrite the debt, and so we just went for it. And I knew exactly how many scans per month I had to sell to make sure I could pay for the debt. And I wasn't getting a salary at the time. Um, Luckily, under the sponsorship, I was basically de-risked by the Air Force sponsoring me for my master's. So I was getting captain's pay, so I
Mhm.
could eat, I could pay the mortgage. I just levered the business to get the first thing going. So I don't think I've done anything that would bury me like that would have since. Granted, kids in the life, mortgage. I had rent. I mean, worst case in LA, if I had to get out of rent, I could live with my grandparents in Orange County, right? So I had all my backup options if things went south. I always think about Armageddon. What do I do if everything goes wrong? And how do I ensure, I'm not homeless, I'm not in jail, my beautiful wife doesn't divorce me, my kids are hungry, right? Like, how do I avoid those things? Because those are showstoppers, like in my opinion. Um, I knew I could stay out of that situation if I had.
Mhm. Like I said before, these stories, like I love hearing them because I think I'm kind of in a similar mindset of I really like kind of not to a like a detrimental extent, but I like being kind of put with my back against the wall
Oh
because
yeah.
it brings out a sort of resourcefulness
Hmm.
that's like you wouldn't have drawn on this like tiny pocket of resourcefulness if you hadn't been pushed with your back against the wall. And
Yeah,
honestly, that's usually where your best products come from.
absolutely. Investors look for it. They want to know your like skin is in the game, your neck is on the line,
Mhm.
especially early stage investors, because they want to know you're all in. Like if you have a cush way to fall back, like it's gonna get hard. It always does. It might sound easy and simple at the beginning, especially you're on the hype cycle. You're like, oh yeah, everybody's excited. Hype cycle, hype cycle. It's gonna come down at some point, right?
Mhm.
And so, are you gonna grind? And Jason and I, we have great stories of sleeping in the X-ray truck on the streets of San Francisco and showering at the 24-hour fitness to save money. But we didn't want to spend the money on a hotel. We literally slept on an X-ray machine. Um, and so, like if things were cush and I knew how to fall back and I had investor money, I probably would have used the investor money to get the hotel room that night.
Mhm.
Right? No, we're gonna
Yeah.
pay attention. We're gonna figure this out. So, and it's the same way at Thrust AI right now. We've taken no outside capital. We're very thoughtful and resourceful, and we're like, yeah, I could outsource and have somebody do this. No, I'm going to teach it myself. I'm going to sit here, till 2, 3 a.m. and just figure it out. And
Mhm.
that's very, very valuable to investors. I think it's very valuable to the company. I think it's very valuable to the leader to understand how to get this job done that needs to be done versus take the easy street and get somebody else to do it or hire somebody or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And I also think I have no personal experience in this, but from what I hear is that there's a certain decision calculus that goes into I even hear my sponsor talk about it. He's like, it's out of my interest to clean my house because I make so much more money doing something else. You
Yeah.
know, I'm sure it's a much different metaphor because the
Mhm.
stuff you're doing isn't equitable to cleaning the house, but it's something that can be outsourced.
Oh, absolutely. Wife and I talk about it all the time in terms of where we spend our time on certain tasks, and is it value add? Some things are like, well, like right now, we're not going to go get an au pair to help raise the kids because we care a lot about raising the
Hmm.
kids. But are there things like, I don't know, example now, I spent extra money to zero-scape and put in really nice turf around my house. Why? I do
Don't have
not
to
want
mow
to
lawns.
in the yard. I don't want to water plants. I'd like that would consume a ton of my time on the weekend that I could invest in my kids so that during the week, if I'm sacrificing any time with them, I can, make it up or vice versa, or work on that weekend and
Hmm.
not, get the HOA coming down my throat because my grass is whatever, whatever it might be. So there are those like decisions around, efficiency, where you think about how valuable my time is. What could I be doing? And is this a task I should be doing? I mean, it's an input versus value scale. It's very
Hmm.
easy, and you should
Yeah.
always be operating in that.
Yeah. So, what sort of metrics do you use to measure the success of your company in certain stages of its
Yeah,
growth?
yeah. I mean, there's the financial ones that like always matter, and the big financial one is called runway. Like, how much cash do I have, and based on my burn rate, how long am I going to survive before I die?
Hmm.
Right. So my current startup, we've now built it to a place where nothing else changes in terms of like no new revenues, anything.
It's like how many big blinds do you have left?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I can survive. I can have a paycheck till 2025. Right.
Okay.
Any decision I make on the business now is either going to be I get additional revenue. So how do I want to spend that to make the business better or more valuable? Or if I need to spend more money, how much is it going to pull my runway in to where then I do
Mm.
need to generate more cash to extend that runway back out and be sustainable and scalable, right? And so that's like the big one, entrepreneur, especially early on, and even through early stages of like venture capital raising. um, After that, you start getting into whatever your business is like specifically. So like body spec was like utilization rates. So like for every location we went to, how many scans based on the capacity we could sell that day did we sell, right? And so that was like a laser focused metric for us. It can be, last my private equity gig, we were hyper focused on our customer average contract value. So how much was our first sale to them, and then how long would those customers stay our customer? We care deeply about. With Thrust AI, it's the amount of revenue for the TAM, the total addressable market that I'm trying to sell to.
Okay.
Um, and so it changes. Like those financial metrics will change depending on the business. But then there's like the non-financial metrics, which I think are really, really important to follow and think about. Customer satisfaction. You always see in a lot of apps or things you do, you get that question: how likely are you to recommend Delta Airlines to a friend? And it has a scale of 1 to 10.
Mm.
It's called an NPS score. There's a whole formula behind it, and there's industry benchmarks. And so obviously they want as many tens and nines as possible, and don't want ones and twos. If you're getting ones and twos, what's going on? There's something fundamentally wrong with the product or service that we're giving customers because they're not happy with it.
Hmm.
They likely won't continue to buy from us. They'll be looking to switch, right? And so you're really trying to understand, that customer like satisfaction. Depending on the problem you're solving, you're trying to look at the impact on that problem too. Um, so specific one right now with Thrust AI, we have a solution, a software solution that's going to help the DoD and other federal agencies with aviation fuel procurement. Super like niche, but very
Mm.
interesting space, and $10 billion a year of it. Um, that there's a lot of inefficiency, and we can save millions and millions of dollars for the Air Force. And so every customer I work with, based on how much money they give me for my product, I'm trying to always measure and understand how much money am I saving them. Am I
Mm.
solving that problem? Also, we help with efficiency. It used to take a pilot this long to deal with this process for aviation fuel. How long is it taking today? Are we delighting pilots? I'm probably going to make a happy pilot if I save them time, and if I'm saving them time, I'm helping the Air Force better utilize that resource and asset. And so there's all the things around the problem you're solving. What is the measure for the reduction of that problem? So what kind of gain or pain relief are you really providing that customer? Again, that's all nuanced. It really depends on the business, and you need to think about that really, really
Mm.
hard, right? I mean, customer satisfaction would be a big one for like this podcast. Like how much more confident are you, cadet, in your selection of your career? How much more confident are you in becoming an officer? How much more confident are you about being a citizen, a contributing citizen to this country, having graduated from this institution, right? Like
Mm.
those are kind of those soft metrics that if you're delivering a great product, like those should be scoring high, because that's ultimately what you're trying to deliver to your customer, right?
Mm.
At the end of the day.
That's so I just love dealing with that, sort of like problem solving, like we were
Mhm.
mentioning before. This whole field seems like it takes so much critical thinking. This isn't meant for someone who necessarily is just like a screwdriver turner. This is like a strategic thinker sort of role, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because you got to be. It's a mindset too, right? The Call it the screwdriver turner. I'm showing up, I do my job, and I leave.
Mm.
And there's nothing wrong with being that person if that checks the box on your happiness and what you're trying to do in your career, right? At the end of the day, nothing wrong with that. And in fact, we society has to have
Yeah.
folks like that paired with folks that want to maybe challenge and do things different. So it really just depends on the individual. I would challenge that graduates from the Air Force Academy would be individuals that are more likely to recognize a problem and have a desire, willingness, and potential risk appetite to solve it. Because we're not always talking about money risk here. Solving a problem in the Air Force sometimes could be literally telling the commander that there is a problem. And is
Mhm.
that political risk to you? Is that career
Yeah.
risk to say, hey, sir, ma'am, this is a problem? I would say whenever you do that, you better come with a solution. Don't just be the problem caller, right? Like that's the easy job, to be honest. uh,
Everyone sees that.
yeah, it's coming up with a solution that's viable and real, and has a vision for a solution that's aspirational. And people are like, yeah, stop doing so much over here on this job task. I want you to go solve that, captain or lieutenant. That's worth your time and worth the Air Force's time. So yeah, it's a mindset at the end of the day.
Mm. Moving a little bit into your capacity as a reservist, how do you balance doing at first I'd like if you could define like what exactly you do for the military. I haven't gotten a great read because it sounds like you have your hand dipped in a lot of things, but how do you balance those capacities in the military as well as starting another startup and being a big C-suite executive, like a chief strategy officer, or chief operating officer,
Mhm.
in another big company? How do you balance all that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's tough. I think I go back to the time versus value scale a lot, right? I try to really make sure what I'm doing matters. Like in the company, am I working the most strategic things for the company? If there's tasks that I don't need to be doing, is there someone else that can be doing it that might be better suited to be doing it? Um, it's a tough balance. Honestly, and sometimes I feel like I don't do it great, and it hurts. It hurts the soul, because you're like, all right, am I today? Was I a half-assed officer? Was I a half-assed,
Mm.
husband or father? Because I don't want to be any of those. I want to be, be great at all of them. And so it's trying to balance that and also have the realization that you might you might not be the best that you could have been at sometimes, but you're playing the long game. There's a great book out there, by the way. Simon Sinek, who author of Why, has The Infinite Game.
Mm,
It's his most recent book. Highly suggest it. It's a great, I think, mental model. I know people have various opinions of Simon, but in that one he talks a lot about the infinite mindset. Right, I'm playing the long game on a lot of these things in life, and so I need to make sure for finite periods of time, while it might not be the best balance or the best decision that I'm making in that big balance, am I still thinking about the long term for myself, for my family, and then for the organizations that I serve. And so that just comes down to moral compass, character, all those things come
mm,
back at you, and you really have to think through that. And you're not. There's going to be times where you're going to look at yourself and be like, "That wasn't the best I could have done." Um, and so it's tough. It really is. But at the end of the day, I'm passionate about everything that I'm touching right now. Right? I tend to dip out pretty quick if I'm not passionate about it and it's not aligning to life objectives, family objectives. I'll have to dump it, even if I. And sometimes things will not align to family objectives, but I'm like, man, I'm super passionate about that. Like, that sounds really cool. Like my curiosity spikes. I'm like, I have to stay away. I have to stay away because otherwise it's gonna hurt one of these other things that I do care so deeply about, to be spending time. The most scarce resource in startups, in life, believe it or not, is not money. It is time.
Time.
It
Mhm.
is time and focus and energy. Most folks, especially grads and high performing folks, it's you can figure out the money thing. You can go raise money. You can use your own money. You can figure it out. Like, that's a solvable thing, and it's fiat currency at the end of the day. Anyways, who cares? And it's really your time, and how do you want to look back on your life, on what you spent your time on, and where you spend the times on the things that matter to you. So you always gotta work on that alignment.
Okay. It sounds like there's two things going on. One, you have a very long time horizon and you have your objectives laid out pretty firmly, but
Hmm.
also you are like you have a high cognitive capacity. And I think the first one that I stated is something that you can it's a little bit easier to work on because you can just start thinking about your goals that you want to achieve, and it's not easy by any means, but it's a little bit more achievable. So I would love to dig into how you, if you think you could have an answer to this, how you exactly improved your cognitive capacity.
Yeah. Well, first on the goal set, and then I'll come back to cognitive capacity. I actually really I heard this recently, and it just aligned to like my line of thinking. It was from Hassan, who I think you've had on the podcast. Um, I believe. I think I saw you on
Say
not
again?
Hassan Campbell, I think is his last name.
Um,
Maybe not. Maybe not. But he's a 95, 96 grad here in Colorado Springs. Has a great business. He was a football player at the academy, contracting officer.
I think you might have
He
commented on one of the posts. That maybe would have been
Okay. Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
I that name is like slightly vaguely familiar.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
he was recently back up in the Department of Management as a guest speaker. And I can't remember his exact quote, but when it came to goal setting, he actually said, especially your big life goals, professionally, especially, don't be too specific because it puts blinders on you.
Hmm.
Like, you miss opportunities. And I was like, like that really, really resonated with me because I think that's how I've operated when I think about, oh, if I just structured like this, that, and we get in that mode being USAFA puts us in it a lot of times, and we talk about SMART goals, right? Like, I get
Hmm.
it. There's times and a place for SMART goals. What needs to be achieved this quarter in my business better be a very clear objective, right? But in terms of the big things, and thinking about like, where am I going to be in 10 years? I don't know. Like, I only got cash runway till 25, and I might screw that up if I go to spend money on something, right? So like, I don't know, right? And so I think like when you're thinking about goals, make sure you don't cage yourself from opportunity as the result of being so focused on a specific goal, right?
Mhm.
So that's my take there. Uh, Increasing cognitive capacity. Um, when I think about that, it's mostly the reps that I've gotten around context switching and being and seeing so many different things that it has allowed the brain to kind of jump versus being so linear in thought. Like just before this, a 2004 grad, Brian Phillips, he now runs a multi-$100 million private equity fund, is texting me on my previous call, "Hey, can I get you for 5 seconds?" Right? I'm like, "Yeah, man, let me finish on a current call. Let me jump." And I jump on, and it's to talk about a VR company that he acquired because he knew I had worked, at Moth and Flame and started that VR company 4 years ago now. And he's bidding on a contract. He's doing all these things, and he pulls me in to like quickly understand. And I spend 20, 30 minutes on there, and it was fascinating too because I jumped on, and my classmate was on the call, who's his CEO for for one of his companies. Was my classmate from the management department, Sean, which was so there was a reunion moment there too. And I just quickly had to like jump in and think about pairing what they're trying to solve in VR versus what I know from acquisitions and defense because they're trying to do a deal with the State Department. And that context switching does two things. One, it pulls back on experiences and things I've done, but at the same time, it's exercising my brain in new things and new
Mhm.
information. And how are these guys and gals thinking about doing a VR deal with the State Department for like health? I was in the healthcare space, and so now I've built up that requisite experience and understanding and thinking. So there was give and take there. I'm trying to give them my thoughts, but I'm listening to them. I'm taking information and understanding their mental models and how they think about the business and soaking that in. And so I think I'm always trying to expose myself to other entrepreneurs, to trying to read about other things going on. I read the Wall Street Journal like it's my job every day to understand what's going on in the macro environment, what's going on in certain business and industries that I'm with so many folks all the time outside of what would just be benefit to the day job, just to hear their experiences. What are they going through? What are their objectives with their business? Hey, you're doing a new startup? Tell me about it. What's going on? And hearing those journeys, it's again much like your podcast here. And so getting that spray of information and
Mhm.
collaboration and if you're good, you put yourself into the moment. You understand I'm on this call. I'm trying to understand what they're trying to do, and you just immerse yourself, and then you come out of that with a whole new understanding that then just pays dividends down the road. That's an investment that is going to pay dividends for your thought patterns and understanding of how things work and how the world gets done, or things get done in the world. So I think that's probably the biggest thing because I'll be candid on this one. I wasn't like the sharpest kid out of high school. I graduated with like a 3.4 GPA from USAF. I had a 2.1 my freshman year. I had to dig myself out. So I had some rock star
Act
junior
pro
senior years.
scaries.
Yeah, man. Like it was tough. So I've gotten to work. There's folks out there and there's grads. I even work with one right now that have like that beautiful mind. And you're just like, holy cow, you're almost like Mike Ross from Suits that can like memorize everything. That's not me. Like that's not my strongest skill set. Is not that I just have brainiac power to solve things. I have to learn and see it and get reps and understand, and then lever some of my other skill sets that maybe other folks don't have, and advance those as much as I can. So yeah, it's there's days you have a headache. I have a headache at the end of the day because I'm like, holy smokes, man! I just worked this brain really
Mhm.
hard for me. So other people might have been just fine, right? But for me, it was a lot. So that's
Okay.
I think that's the best I got for you. I don't have any herbal herbal supplements or anything like that other than fish pills, my daily omegas to keep going.
So if I could boil that down, it sounds like you have a knack for understanding and identifying patterns that maybe happen in one context and it might be similar to another, but you
Yeah.
can identify the nuances and then map that to some sort of conclusion that's useful.
Yeah, yeah, but that starts with I think the thing I have is I have relentless curiosity too. So the ability or the desire to even to want to go learn about those two very disparate things, but they could have some relational context and or execution pattern is because I'm just super curious. Like, how did you do that? Why did you do that? Right?
Mm,
And that curiosity, I think, allows me to then cognitively be engaged and involved in whatever that conversation,
okay,
might be. And then I'm learning. I'm learning from that, and then that's gonna help me map it in the future.
gotcha. Uh, Before we finish off, I kind of touched on this before, but I want to hone in on what are some of the main skill sets that you think people in the C-suite, whether that's CEO, CFO, COO, whatever it is. Obviously, you have that like a finance officer. They know what the hell they're doing when it comes to the books. Is there any sort of broad skill of, like I said, maybe strategic thinking that maps to a lot of people in that C-suite?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the C-suite needs to be not only strategic thinkers, but strategic communicators,
Okay.
right? So you need to be able to execute. So I mean, we do it all the time. I think at USAF of the pyramid, right? Strategic, operational, and tactical,
Hmm.
right? So you better be able to, work with and lead your middle management, that's your operators, to work with the team to tactically execute the things that must be needed. And you have to understand how that all works, right? You might not be doing it, but if you're gonna help and lead and sometimes, take the trash out and do it yourself to show that, like you better know and understand how to do all that stuff, right? But it's not what you need to be doing with your time on a daily basis. It needs to be strategic, and that's strategic in terms of, and again, it depends on the role, right? So like finance, right? When I've done CFO seats, I'm trying to think strategically about capital raising and the application and the spending of our money in the business, not only for the next month, but what does it need to look like over the next 3 years? Who are we going to hire and why, and how is that going to advance the business objectives? In kind of a COO or founder seat, you need to strategically communicate to your investors, to your board, to your potential and or future customers. You got to paint vision and help them understand. Then you got to go to
Mm,
your team and have an aspirational vision. Like, what is the just cause? Like, why are people showing up? Every employee is mostly at will. That is called a volunteer, right? They can quit at any time. Why are they putting on, again, for the civilians, their clothes that day and driving into work or jumping on the Zoom calls to work, right? Because they're trading their time for a paycheck, and they have an option to not do that anymore with you. And so how do you motivate and inspire them from a strategic viewpoint and give them that strategic understanding and vector, so when they try to take whatever the heck you're saying, how do they operationalize it and execute it at a tactical level to be successful? And if you can think that way but not speak that way, there's going to be an upper limit to the career, right? You can work in a strategy office, you could do things, but like, you can't interface with customers, you can't interface with the executive board, you can't interface with employees or lead employees, right? um
mm,
and so it's kind of, I'd say both those kind of are required, the thinking as well as the communication. And then it quickly dovetails into being, a great leader, that folks are in leadership. The fundamental core is trust to follow, trust to do, trust to invest, right? When you're trying to lead the board or lead the investor on their decision to be the steward and shepherd of their investment, they got to trust that you're the leader that's going to do the right thing, and they trust that your vision is something you can execute on as an operator. And so those are the most profound like skill sets that I've seen with peers and folks I've gotten to work with, and I've seen when it goes wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Candidly, the reason I had to exit the VR company was the CEO lost the trust of the employees and the investors. And so there was nothing I could do about that. And so it became time for me to move on, unfortunately. I still love that company. But, if you lose that, it's that leader will be done at some point. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, I feel like there's so many follow-on questions, but it's kind of outside of the scope of what we're trying to do. And I think this episode definitely got in a little bit of the weeds.
Yeah.
But like, you're a grad. This is something I'm deeply interested in. So I'm sure even if it's much smaller, there are at least a few cadets that hopefully will find something useful in this episode. So it's a huge thank you to you for spending time out of your extremely busy day to spend it with me and discussing basically what you do for a living. So thank you.
Awesome. No, Andrew, I appreciate it. I hope, it is of value to someone out there. And I would say, still being faculty every now and then, non-management majors, will ask like, what's the relevance of like what we're learning in entrepreneurship or whatever. So hopefully I've had a few nuggets on, leadership and understanding risk that, are ubiquitous to all majors. But, entrepreneurship is, again, problem solving at the end of the day. And, I encourage folks to be just great problem solvers, and it's problem solvers with sustainable and scalable solutions. So it's not point solutions. You're scaling things organizationally or for a customer or for a market. And so I work for, as a co-founder, I'm a co-founder of my next startup, but I'm a COO. So from a hierarchy perspective, there is a CEO that I report into. That CEO is a 2018 grad. I'm 2008, so 10 years younger as a grad.
Holy.
I've always said this, Andrew, actually to my students. I say, I hope someday, and I am willing someday to work for all of you. He's a great leader, and he's an astro major from the academy. So he's an astro major, 2018 CEO and founder of a startup, and I'm ready to go ride this whale with him and make this thing just a huge rocket ship of success. And so you just don't know, like, so in terms of objectives, like astro major, astronaut, I don't know, right? Build the next greatest satellite.
That's what my brain goes.
Work in Lockheed Martin, build satellites, work for SpaceX, which, by the way, he did work for SpaceX. Be a pilot, and he was a pilot. And so it's just interesting. There's just no clear path and definition like going forward, right? And you can only, stealing Steve Jobs, you can only connect the stars going backwards. So I hope folks always just have that open mindset and just attack life in the world with the idea and concept of delivering value to people and to society. And you can do that in an entrepreneurial way at times. So yeah, no, it's a pleasure to be on, Andrew. And if there's ever a need for a deep dive follow-up per your listeners' request, so you can give them the best product ever, let me know. I'm always happy to support.
I might give you that follow-up on behalf of my few listeners. So thanks again. You could have been spending your time anywhere else, but you chose to spend it with me. So thanks again, sir.
Awesome.
Bryce, sorry.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks, Andrew.